The iPad should work. Okay, I think we're live. Okay.
Have you met Susan?
Hi, Susan.
Well, I worked for several different companies, actually. I worked for a small brokerage. They were local in San Diego. They weren't a big company. They were just
Easy question. I don't know what to do with it.
Why do you want your own?
Because we don't use it.
a little bit bigger. Yeah, a little bit bigger. I like working at smaller companies better. Yeah, I got more pay and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The problem is if you ever use
It
store,
was cool working
like,
at
now I don't want that shit.
Yeah, it was nice. Yeah, glad I'm doing my own things.
You know what they say? If I was
Or if you hold on to something long enough, it will come back.
Oh, were they?
That's the other thing. Okay.
I used to work in a company there.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Kabbalah and Closeness.
Yeah, I like the smaller company better.
Right? It's Kabbalah and Coffee. So just let me explain what's going on here. Our setup didn't happen. We have a new crew that came in Saturday night for the cleanup and setup, and they didn't set up for the class. So we did an abbreviated setup this morning and figured, no, maybe we can make it squeeze by with just 4 tables. Clearly, that was not the case. I was thinking maybe the marathon would hold some people back, but you guys made it. I love it. Okay. I hope everyone's okay. You're okay? Everyone's good? Okay. All right. We're...
Intimate.
Yes, exactly. So if you got the email, so you know that the subject of today's class is? Nothing. I think my work here is done. So it feels like an episode of Seinfeld, which was the show about nothing. So this is the class about nothing. Nothing in Hebrew is called ayin.
Spell?
Aleph, in English, A-Y-I-N, ayin. Not to be confused. Now in Hebrew, there's a homonym. Homonym? Where does it sound the same? Okay. So ayin, there's ayin and then there's ayin. There's ayin with an aleph, which means nothing. There's ayin with an ayin. We're getting meta now. Ayin with an ayin, which means I. Not I. Oh, now we're getting to other I and I. Not this I, this I. Ay, ay, ay. You know, in Hebrew, who is he, and he is she, and a dog is a fish. How about that?
I needed that.
How about that? There's even a kid's song. Who is he, and he is she? I am you, and you are me. No, that's not part of it. That was a joke. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. Thanks for having my back when the chips were down. Okay, so today's class is about ayin, is about nothingness. So I want to begin with a baseball analogy because tis the season for baseball. My kids have 2 baseball games today, and that's my life right now, schlepping to baseball. So let's talk about baseball. If I'm dealing with baseball, you're going to deal with baseball right now. So what's the deal with baseball? You take a ball. I wish I would have had a prop here. You take a ball and you throw it into the air. What's going to happen? Well, you throw it into the air. What's going to happen first? It's going to go up, right? Right, it's going to go up. And then what's going to happen? So it's going to come down. So here's my question. Very simple question, but I need an answer. Why is it that the ball comes down? Why doesn't it stay up? Gravity. Okay. Yeah? You're like, I think so, but it's Kabbalah. Who knows what's going to happen now? Okay, gravity. Good. So what that means is, gravity. So why then did the ball go in the air if gravity? If gravity is a real force, I'm not challenging gravity today, don't worry. This is not going to be like, does gravity really exist? No, gravity is real. But if gravity is real, so how did the ball go up in the first place?
Force. Some kind of force above gravity.
So a person exerted a force on the ball greater than the force of gravity. Correct? Gravity is what's the equation? All right. All right, we're all in the same boat then. Something meters per second, right? Something per second.
9 meters per second square, right?
Or give or take, yeah.
But
So
it's a constant, in Earth it's a constant.
On Earth
It's
it's a
variable,
constant.
but it's a constant, so
Right.
you have to go above that constant, whatever that force
So, right, whatever the force of gravity is, if you exert a force greater than the force of gravity, you will be able to propel that ball upward and out of this gravitational, right? Otherwise it sits down, it's just on the ground or on the table or whatever it is, it's just sitting inert, not moving, whatever. If you exert a force greater than the force of gravity upon this item, you can launch into the air, and then of course it has to come down. It's a very interesting thing when it comes to launching rockets. Anybody launched a rocket before into outer space?
No.
Oh, there was that 4th of July thing, But launching a rocket into outer space presents a unique challenge because, of course, you have to contend against gravity, gravity, but you also have to contend against other frictions and other forces. And you also have to contend against the actual rotation of the Earth. So it's interesting, I heard this from an expert an Israeli weapons expert, who told me that when Israel was launching their satellites into outer space, or into orbit, so in order to alleviate some of that friction, it would have been wise to launch it a certain direction, but that direction would have put it over some countries that were not friendly toward Israel. So they had to launch it the other direction, which was basically doubling the amount of force that they needed to get it into orbit, but they had to do so that it would be launched toward the direction of friendlier nations that wouldn't knock it out of the sky. Anyway, the point is that to get something out of the gravitational pull, you need to exert some effort. Okay. And what happens? So why does it return? If you've overwhelmed that thing with force, so why does it return down to the ground?
Gravity.
So how come gravity didn't hold it back initially?
There's a certain amount of
initial
energy,
force was greater.
acceleration, decelerates it.
Good. So you infused it with a certain amount of energy and force, and at some point, the energy that you put into it dissipates, and it reverts back to its previous status. It's like the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote. Remember that?
Beep beep.
Beep beep. And the Roadrunner is doing its thing and makes the quick, sharp turn, and Wile E. Coyote is chasing, runs off the cliff, and is doing fine until he looks around for a moment and realizes this shouldn't be happening, and then he sinks down. It's always that self-awareness that sinks us, by the way, which is another lesson. But here's the point. There's a point where the energy, where that force wears off, and then gravity resumes and resumes its pull. Which tells us that when a person exerts the force over that baseball or that item, no transformation happened. It didn't transform into a flying entity, an entity that has its own anti-gravitational force. Correct? It didn't transform into something that in and of itself defies gravity. It's still bound by the laws of gravity. The fact that right now it's going against gravity, it's going up, 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 only means not that it's become something that is not subject to the laws of gravity, but rather you've overwhelmed it momentarily with a force that breaks gravity, and at some other point it'll likely fall back down. Correct? Yes? In other words, the baseball that's launched into the air, from the outfield. How far is it from the outfield to home plate, throwing out a runner? Some 300 feet, 400 feet sometimes. They have guys, outfielders, who can actually throw. Hey, Nina. We know you. There are fielders who can throw out, who can catch a ball on the warning track and throw out a runner trying to get home. With incredible cannon arms. So it's like 375, 390 feet in the air. That represents an incredible force. Or somebody that hits a baseball 500 feet. That's pushing it. 450 feet. 500 feet maybe sometimes. In Colorado. Maybe with some extra help. So what's happening? The force exerted on that baseball is much greater than the force of gravity, propels it into the air. That force eventually slowly disappears, runs out, and the baseball goes down in a downward trajectory back down to Earth, back down to its gravitational pull. Which means that as it was going up on the ascent, it wasn't transformed into an item that is no longer subject to the laws of gravity. Imagine if the baseball became self-aware and said, look at me, all those other baseballs, those other economy class baseballs, just sitting there on the earth. I'm a flying baseball. Look at me. I've defied the laws of gravity. I've broken the spell. I found the Holy Grail. This is like the key to success as a baseball. I'm a flying baseball. Can you imagine how much I'll go on eBay? A flying baseball? Good luck holding it down. You have to keep it in a box.
Jewish baseball.
Right. Someone can monetize this. Imagine if that, and then at a certain point the baseball's like, nah, you know what? I'm just like them. I'm just one of the regular baseballs on my way back down to Earth. It was good while it lasted. That's the life cycle of a flying baseball. You might think that it's a flying baseball. It's just a baseball that's been propelled in the air and now comes back down to Earth. And at some point will land on the ground and just be like all the other balls. And there will be no indication in the baseball itself that it was ever launched into the air. I mean, can you measure? Maybe you can. I'm just going to assume that you can. So work with me on this. 2 baseballs. Can you tell which one had been launched into the air prior? Probably not. Maybe the one that was hit by the bat, because it has a scuff mark on it, fine. But one that was just softly tossed into the air and caught, right? Are you going to be able to tell which one was thrown and which one wasn't? No. You know why? Because nothing changed. It was never transformed. It was overwhelmed by a force, but it wasn't transformed. Now, this is a good analogy for the difference between makif and panimi, which we're not getting into today. This is parenthetical right now. So put a parentheses or brackets or one of the squiggly brackets or one of those things if you're into coding, however you want to do it. But this is not where we're going with this, but I need to mention there are 2 phrases in Kabbalah. One is makif, one is panimi. Makif means a transcendent force. Panimi means an internal force. What is the difference between transcendence? Huh?
How do you spell that in Hebrew?
Makif, mem, kuf, yud, final fe. And then panimi is pei, nun, yud. Not to be confused. Wait, did I say panini or panimi?
I heard panini.
I think I said panini. I said panini, right?
No, you
Did I
didn't.
say panini?
Yes.
All right.
channeling a spicy speech.
No, I was channeling a joke. I was going to make a joke, but I may have leaked it before. Whatever. Can't take me anywhere. Okay.
I didn't hear that. So
Makif.
my-
Which, the joke? I'll reset it. No, I'm kidding. Pay, which one? Pay, the penny. Okay, Makif is mem, kuf, yud, final fe, Makif. And panimi is pei, nun, yud, mem, yud. Panimi. So Makif and panimi. In English, M-A-K-I-F, Makif. And panimi would be P-N-I-M-I. Panimi. Now, what's the difference? So makif represents a force that is outside of that thing. It can still influence the thing, and it influences the thing, but it influences it from the outside in, and it doesn't create change inside. Whereas panimi represents an influence that happens inside to create real transformation. It's the difference between a sermon and a class. This is the way the previous Rabbi describes it. Again, not all sermons or classes are equal, but the general concept. A good sermon is meant to really inspire us. Wow, what a great sermon. And you walk out, wow, that was amazing. So what they say, no idea. But I know that I was inspired, right? I know that it was uplifting while it lasted. But afterwards, a class, education is meant to change us from the inside out. So that when you walk out, you're still left with information. And information and tools that you can actually apply and create real change. So there's makif and pnimi, the example that I always give. And some of you have heard this probably literally dozens of times. You have a room, this is not a good example because there are windows. You have a room without windows. And it has a light, it has electricity, it has a light switch and a light bulb. And you turn on the light. So now the room is illuminated. Leave it on for 24 hours. And it gets really light, right? It's saturated by light for 24 hours. You walk in, you shut off the light. What's going to happen? Pitch black. As dark as if you had never turned on the light before. No residual effect. Nothing. I know what you're thinking. What if I have the glow-in-the-dark stickers? Then it's going to... No, there's no glow-in-the-dark stickers. Nothing. Garnished. I know you weren't thinking that, but I was thinking that. I'm just welcome to my brain. Anyway, there is something that gets affected from the inside. All right, we'll leave glow-in-the-dark stickers aside for right now, because we'll be very upset.
Inside there.
Huh?
I'm trying to imagine what it's like inside there.
Inside the room, I'm sure that's what you meant. I know exactly what you mean. So, after 24 hours of light, the room doesn't become light. There's light in the room, but the room doesn't become light. Even as the room is illuminated, it's imposed from the outside in. It's not from the inside out. Correct? Somebody there? Yep. Thank you. Appreciate it. We see the shadows. Who was that? Plato who talked about the shadows?
Yes.
Yeah.
Allegory.
Yeah, the cave allegory. Who knows if it's anybody's behind the shadows? Maybe it's just
Allegory of the cave.
Actually,
Yeah.
okay.
yeah.
They would be in front of the cave. No.
Well, we're doing a very loose representation of it. So here's the idea. Transformation, light doesn't create transformation on that level, in that way. So that's makif. Pnimi is, again, the example of education. So the difference between light and wisdom, which also can be likened to light, we've talked about before about chachma being like the lightning bolt, the lightning flash of insight, creative insight. We've talked about the notion that in popular, comics, when a person has an idea, a brilliant, creative idea, it's symbolized by the light bulb going off. But there's a difference, because ideas are internal. Light is external. When you turn off the light, nothing changed. But when you have a teacher and a student, the teacher can walk out of the room, the students retain the information, hopefully. Right, a good teacher, hopefully. The students retain the information. Because wisdom creates change on the inside. Light doesn't create change. Light imposes its light from the outside. Light is makif, wisdom is pnimi. Light is on the outside, and even as it's on the outside, it can have an effect inside, but it doesn't create a transformation on the inside. In other words, that which is imposed from the outside could have an effect, but not a transformation. Was it last Sunday that we spoke about different modalities of education? When you conform someone to do what you want versus you change them? No?
Well,
In a different class we spoke about this.
I think we talked about, I think the parallel here too, is that you were saying, a sermon versus a class, but
Yeah.
also a sermon might be a lecture, where it's something from the outside, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're connecting to that.
Right.
So I think I don't know if we talked about it as modes, but generally that.
When you tell someone, it must have been a different class, when you tell someone what to do,
Yeah.
even if they'll do it, it doesn't necessarily mean that the change has happened from the inside.
Rabbi, I'd like to think that when you speak, it's changing me on the inside.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was waiting for someone to say that, but I appreciate that. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. That's the goal. The ultimate goal is that, not that you, see, with light, you need that constant force. And once the moment it disappears, there's no trace of it ever being there on some level.
Well, okay, so light also usually comes with heat. So you take a desk lamp and you put it too close to one of these cups, okay? There's wax on the inside of these cups. So you put it too close and the light itself is actually creating heat.
And the heat,
Will transform. That's
Right.
where the transformation comes from, right?
and then when the heat is gone, when that light source is gone, at some point it's going to revert back to its, I guess, its room
You'll see
temperature.
that it's been changed.
But it will have been changed.
Yeah.
There is change that happens that remains ongoing, where the actual change keeps on going, as opposed to a one-time change where you can still notice that it had been changed, but the change is no longer ongoing. In other words, that's kind of a hybrid between Makif and Pnimi,
Okay.
where it did create some change, but it's
I'm
still,
good at finding the
as they
actual-
say in Yiddish, Amalek Zeiten. That means like once upon a time changed. It's like once upon a time I was changed. Like once upon a time I was really, like I really believed in humanity. But now now I realize that it is what it is. It's like there was change that happened, but not right now. Whereas there are things that create change, and that change is ongoing, even without the original source of the change. If that makes sense. It says that Torah is likened to planting a seed. When you plant a seed is a good example of something that creates change from the inside. You plant a seed in the earth, right, and the next thing you know, all these things are happening. Notice I said all these things because, I'm not a botanist. What am I going to give you the details of exactly what happens? But my understanding is the seed, at least according to Kabbalah, the seed disintegrates and becomes part of the earth, and the generative power, the growth power in the earth itself, connects with the power of the seed to create something new that continues to grow, and that it itself has that power to create more. And the cycle continues because it bears fruit, let's say it's a fruit bearing tree, which then has more seeds, which then create more trees. And the cycle continues. So this one thing, it's not like the seed imposes on the earth from the outside. It's on the inside, and it works with it to cultivate, to nurture whatever it is that has to happen, and then something happens, and that growth and that change continues. So hopefully in education, it's not like, oh, I can tell that the wax looks a little bit disturbed. I guess they'd once been educated. But rather, the education ideally is something that grows and sticks with the person as they grow and informs them every way along the way. I think we all have those mentors or loved ones, relatives, teachers, parents, grandparents, friends, whatever it was, who influenced our lives, not just once, but the influence is ongoing. And we could say, you know what, even though maybe they haven't spoken to me at every stage of my life, I can recall a lesson or two or several that they taught me that I can then apply to many situations that I go through in life. And even though they're not here, I can say, well, what would they have said, or what did they tell me that can help me in this situation? That is invaluable. And when I say invaluable, I mean priceless. That is priceless, to have that type of influence on us. Because what it means is that we're not alone going through these moments or these changes in life. We have someone or something with us that helps us, that guides us through these various stages in life. That's what having a true impact on someone looks like. That far after they're gone, the influence is still there, the impact is still there. That's how you know something is alive. you should know there's a Torah portion, Bereshit, Noach, Lech Lecha, Vayera, Chayesara, the 5th Torah portion in the book of Genesis. So number 5 is called Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah. And the entire Torah portion talks about her death. Well, it starts off with her death, and then her burial, and then the aftermath, what happens after. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe asked the question, why would you call a Torah portion, why would you name a portion, the life of Sarah, when all it talks about is her passing? And the Rebbe explains, because the true mark of life is not what you did. How do you know that someone lived? Not by what they did when they were alive, but by the impact that they still have even after they're no longer alive in the physical sense. That's when you know someone lived. Because if they're only creating waves or whatever it is while they're alive, but after 120 years there's no effect, that's kind of like the light goes off and it's dark. And it's like that person, it's like the light never was if it doesn't have a continuation. Am I articulating this clearly? Clear enough? So, how do you know that the light is truly light, or that the influence is truly influence? That something is really happening? You know that even when the light's off, I know I'm mixing, right? Even when that person, in a physical sense, is no longer here, the impact is still happening. That's the definition of life. So the definition, let's say, of education in this paradigm is not, are the students listening while you're speaking? It's long after you finish talking. And maybe a decade later, are they still influenced? Are they still informed by what you've taught them? Are they still guided by the mentoring that you gave them? Is there some impact, some effect that you had that will carry with them for the rest of their lives? Sounds like a tall order, but hey, that's the goal, right? To have an influence. We live in the influencer generation. Everyone's an influencer. Everyone wants to be an influencer because you get paid on Instagram or something like that. So the kids tell me. So why am I saying all this? It's because there is a distinction between, using the terminology we introduced last week, ila va'olol and yesh me'ayin. So let's bring back these ideas. There are two ways to produce something else or something new. There is a way to produce something new that follows a logical progression, stage by stage. Let's stick with education. How do you create an idea? How do you teach an idea to a student? So you take the idea in your head and you have to define its parameters, what exactly it is that you wish to teach. Then you have to think about the student. How will they best understand these ideas? And then you have to kind of take your idea and fit it into the recipients, the vessels, the kalim, the vessels of the recipient. And it's a process of kind of, bringing it down to the student until the student can grasp it. It says about King Solomon that he was so wise that he could give 3,000 parables for an idea. And Kabbalah says, what was so wise about 3,000 parables? I can give you an example of a cat, an example of a dog, an example of a pigeon, an example of a child. I can give you a lot of examples about the same thing. So 3,000 what? He was more creative. Like what's? So Kabbalah explains, no. He was able to bring down an idea 3,000 degrees, 3,000 levels. He was able to take a lofty idea and bring it down, level by level, different levels of understanding, even 3,000 levels below where he started. And each level, each successively lower level of understanding had its own way of framing it and understanding it. And that was the parable, that was the analogy that he was able to give to explain it on that level. So when we teach, we take ideas and we bring them down. I started today's class with a baseball. Right? No baseballs in the original. But if we speak about theoretical concepts, it becomes hard to understand. So we start off with a baseball. And we're throwing a baseball. And we're catching the baseball. And everything's fine. And it's fun. And we understand it. And then slowly we introduce the ideas of gravity and other forces and forces. Right? I'm not going to take you through the opening again. But this is also an example of Ila v'Alol, where there's an idea that's born of another idea. Or let's say the analogy, known in Hebrew as the mashal, the analogy is a derivative or an embodiment, a representation of the idea itself. So you have the abstract idea, which then comes down into this example. Maybe a parable, maybe a story. So this is not producing something new. Right? It's not a new idea. It's an evolution of the abstract idea. It's the abstract idea becoming born into another form that is more tangible, if you will, and understandable to the student. Correct? Like if you're teaching, if Einstein would walk into a middle school science class and start teaching the highest levels of his scientific knowledge, the kids wouldn't understand. Correct? Correct. He would have to take his ideas and bring them radically down to the level of the students, if you wish for them to understand. When he did that, would this wisdom be new information? It wouldn't be new. But it might be radically different than the way he usually thinks, but it's still not brand new. It's an evolution of the idea, but it's not a new idea. And you could trace the evolutionary process from high-level idea to lower-level idea to lower-level idea to lower-level idea. You with me on this? You could actually be able to trace, theoretically, be able to trace the downward progression of the idea through the various levels of comprehension and understanding until it became even understandable to the middle school class.
We call that stack trace. In programming, you can see exactly what called what called what, all the way down to
how it got from
level.
here
Yeah,
to
exactly.
there.
It's a stack trace.
There's a way to trace it.
Mm-hmm. And you can see like the very specific, detailed all the way down to the kernel level, which is just the
Nice.
process. Yeah.
So in Kabbalah, there's a phrase called Seder Hishtalshalut. This is an important phrase to know. Seder Hishtalshalut, which means the order of progression of the worlds. Kabbalah, of course, speaks of many different worlds, 4 primary worlds: Atzilut, Beriah, Yetzirah, and Asiyah, the world of emanation, the world of creation, the world of formation, the world of action. We live in the lowest dimension of the world of action, the physical dimension. There's a spiritual dimension as well to this world of action. The point is that all of this, the entire structure of existence, is called Seder Hishtalshalut, which means the order of progression of the worlds. But Hishtalshalut, you want to spell? Should I spell it?
Yeah, please.
In Hebrew, Hey Shin Taf Tal Lamed Hishtal Shalut Shin Lamed Vav Taf. Yeah. In English, eights. It's not even a thing. Hish Hish Tal Tal Shalut Shelut. Hishtal Shalut. I feel like this is the Scripps spelling bee in DC. Scripps? Did I make that up?
That's right.
Spelling bee is Scripps?
Yes.
All right. Just making sure. Thought so. Okay. Hishtalshalut means there's an order of progression of the worlds where you start off with the very holy and abstract. And it goes lower, lower, lower. The divine energy becomes more concretized, more materialized until God produces this. Hishtalshalut is also related to the Hebrew word shalshelet. Shalshelet, which means a chain. A shalshelet is a chain. Like a chain, like a necklace chain that's comprised of interlocking links. I was like a second away from links. I was right there, right? Interlocking links. So imagine you unfasten it if it's like hooked, right? And you hold it up in a top to bottom vertical fashion. So you're holding it up. Let's say it's, I don't know how long are necklaces.
18 to 24 inches.
Let's say 18 inches. It's a good number. Chai inches. Hello, how are you doing? Chai. So chai inches. And so you're holding it up, and you have, it starts at the top and it's at the bottom. And if you look at the top and the bottom, there's a big gap. Probably like 18 inches or so. So it's a big gap. And yet, you can trace how you got from one to the other. Because there are links. So this, in other words, the top and the bottom aren't immediately connected. There's a big gap between top and bottom. But the bottom is connected with the penultimate link. What's the third to last called? Nothing. Second to last is penultimate, right? I'm just going to keep on talking. So, okay. Right? So you have the last link is connected with the second to last link. So what? Those are close. Good. And the second to last link is connected, going upwards, right? To the third to last. Those are close. Good. And so on and so forth until you get back to the first. So you don't get from the last to the first or from the first to the last in one fell swoop. You get to it gradually. There's a progression. You take an idea. It starts off as an abstract idea, Einstein's idea. One of Einstein's many ideas. Big idea. And now he's teaching middle school science. The teacher was out, whatever. Einstein, you're in. There he is. Right there in the class. Assuming he could do it. Because not everyone that thinks on a high level can also bring it down to a lower level.
Or manage middle schoolers.
Well, yeah, that's even right. But let's leave that aside. Let's leave the human management piece aside, which is the big piece, right? Taking that idea, assuming that this teacher can do it, taking that idea and moving down, 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 down. So there's the idea the way it originated, the idea the way it's manifest now to the student, and there might be a massive gap and gulf between the two, but you could, theoretically, trace the idea and trace the progression either downward or upward, step by step. Here's point 1, here's point number 2, point number 3, this is where it started, this is where we went down, and down, and down, and down, and down, and of course, as you teach the student, you start from the last link, right? You give them what's on their level, and then you hopefully get them back up, 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 to understand the true, vast brilliance of the idea. Okay, so all of this is an example of let me just finish this idea, of ila va'olol, cause and effect. It's a progression, it's a rational progression, it makes sense, it's logical, step by step, one thing leads to the next. When you look at the thing above, you can see the thing below. When you look at the thing below, you can see the thing above. The links are linked one to the other. And so maybe if you looked at the end and the beginning, you would say, wow, that's a really big gap. That's a really big jump. But you don't have to look at the beginning and the end because you see all the different links. You see how each one is connected and how the progression happened from one to the other, either going forward or backwards, up or down or up, however you want to phrase it. All of that is ilah va'olol. And the example we gave last week is a similar example where you have ideas that lead to emotions. Right? You're meditating or you're thinking about something, you're focusing on it, and now you have a feeling toward it, either for or against. You're thinking about a vacation, let's say, and you're going to the vacation resort website, and you're looking at the pictures of the resort, and it looks so beautiful and so lovely, and the next thing you know, you're excited about the vacation. So it starts off in the mind. You're looking at the pictures, you're researching it, right? You're looking at it. So it's in the head. And soon, your heart gets excited. You become emotionally connected with it. You become excited about the vacation. Great. This too is considered to be ilav al cause and effect, which means it's not like the idea and the emotion are two completely separate worlds. Like, I have no idea how that emotion came from that idea. No, it makes sense. There's a progression. You were thinking about, what you're going to do in 6 months. You heard about a place to go on vacation. You Google best resorts in that location. I'm just making up a thing, right? Work with me on this progression. Right? So you have vacation time. Great. So you're thinking about going to a certain destination. You Google best resorts. You click on a link. You look at the pictures, etc., etc. The next thing you know, now you're excited. You're excited about the vacation. You have an emotional connection, attachment, excitement. Yeah, wonderful. It's great. But it's not that emotion came from nowhere. You can trace the emotion back to the ideas, the steps that you took to give birth to that emotion. Because emotions are born of a step-by-step process, which, as I said last week, is a major tool in the Kabbalistic tool belt, maybe. Yeah, I guess. Right? It's a very important tool to have. To know that our feelings are in our control and we can take logical step-by-step actions to produce the emotions that we wish to have is so critically important. Because so often, human beings feel like their emotions are in charge. And people become slaves to their emotions. Like, I had to do it, that's what I was feeling. That's how I felt. And I think, to some extent, we live in a world in which emotions are somewhat deified. Somewhat deified. Like if that's how you feel, like you got to go with your feelings. Kabbalah has a different construct. Kabbalah says feelings are the result of how you're thinking. So they're not their own entity. Feelings are simply a manifestation of where your head is. So if you want to change your feelings, change what you're thinking. So if a person is feeling negative, you've heard me say this probably countless times, so we have to ask ourselves, what stimuli are we putting in front of our heads, in front of our eyes? What are we thinking about? Are we following the news and all of the negativity? Good morning. All of the negativity that is sharing? Or do we focus on things that are maybe of a little bit of a more positive spin? I was speaking about this yesterday to somebody. It's been on my thoughts the last few weeks. There's a massive conflict of interest. And it affects all of us. And it's really important that I think we all know this, but it's really important to really know this. There's a conflict of interest. Those that put out information that consumers consume are driven by monetary considerations. We all know this. And the monetary considerations, and we know that when people are afraid, they're more likely to keep on watching. So there's a vested interest in those that put out information, to put out negative information or scary information to make more money. Not that I'm not saying that things aren't true or are true. I'm not getting into the truth of it. But the reality is that the world is better today than it's ever been. Humanity is better today than it's ever been. There is less poverty, there is less war, there is less human suffering than ever before. I'm not suggesting that everything is fine. There's a lot of work to do, and we need to know wherein the work lies. But to live in a state of anxiety and fear is not a healthy state to be in.
Have you read Harari's book, Israeli author Yuval Harari, Sapiens?
No.
That's one of his main theses, that the world is in a better state with regard to war.
It's not a theory, it's a fact.
I mean, a fact, yeah.
I wasn't challenging you. I was just saying it's
That's his thesis.
right, and it's a documented fact. The poverty level 150 years ago,
Yeah.
right? 10% of people were above the poverty line in the United States, or maybe worldwide. I don't know. I'm not sure. I just read the study recently. Today, 10% are below the poverty line. It's probably the U.S. The question is, what are we putting? I'm not suggesting that we hide under a rock and pretend that everything is good and then life is great. You have to also know what's going on. It's important. But if we become dominated by the agenda of, again, it's a fact. There's a conflict of interest. The conflict of interest is that there are organizations that are driven by money, and the money comes in when people are scared. So that's it. It's a fact.
It's a consumable item.
It's a fact. No one's going to tune in to seeing, some good news. People aren't like, I must see that good news. Tell me what's going to happen. Like, I need to tune in at 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. I need to keep on hitting refresh on the page to see the good news. No one does that. So it's not, what was the word they used? I like that word. It's not consumable.
Yeah.
It's not, you can't monetize it.
But what you're talking about with Kabbalah, the thing that I love is when we find truth, quote unquote truth, meaning we find the same story in many different places. So in Buddhism, in Stoicism, in Confucianism, it's all the same, which is, even in science, where is the idea that you're resonating on? It becomes a feedback effect, unfortunately. So you feel worried about something, so that's what you're going to be focusing on,
right,
without untying that knot of where
right,
did it come from. And that's where, the opposite of Jewish meditation is the Buddhist meditation, which is the emptying your mind, if you will. But really all that is where did this, let's focus on the first idea where this really came from. What we're doing really is just backfilling unknown data with our own thoughts, and so what I call believing our own thoughts, if you will, or turning that into fact and truth, when really it's just our own limited perspective.
And it's so important to recognize that if we feel a certain way, it's likely because our minds are filled with certain ideas and certain thoughts. And so if we want to change how we feel, we have to change how we think, or maybe even more simply, what we're thinking about. It sounds so simple, but it's so radical. It's very hard. Simple, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
Right? Simple and easy are not the same thing. Right? Simple doesn't mean easy. Simple means it's straightforward, but it's profoundly difficult.
Yes.
If I've said this many times, if we wake up in the morning and turn on the news and see all the stuff that's terrible in the world or in our community, of course we're going to feel anxious.
We turn that into a fact without double checking, is this really
Say it? Yeah, it's not good for us. But again, they're not in the business of what's good for us.
No.
We have to. This is not against any specific thing. It's just a reality. It's weird. It's weird. I was thinking about it yesterday. I don't think I'm articulating the extent to which I find this so baffling. Information that we all consume is literally being put out, and it doesn't. I'm not speaking about any affiliation, any side. It doesn't matter. Information is put out by those that have a monetary agenda, and it's.
Yeah, they know when people are afraid, they hoard, and it's a
social
natural.
media,
Yeah.
analysis of megadata,
Yeah.
and using it for profit.
I don't know. It's like
I think we have to be careful about generalizing too, because
No, this is Kabbalah generalization.
Right.
Who has the time to paint with fine brushes? Come on.
I mean, there are some information. The World Health Organization, the CDC, right now are putting out information to try to protect people.
Yes.
And I don't know that I would capture that as monetary.
No, of course not. Yeah, no, I'm with you, of course.
We're talking about advertised.
Yeah.
No, but I think we need to clarify.
No, you're making a good point. What I'm not saying is that everyone who puts out information has an agenda that's monetary. No, of course there are there are pure. But when you talk about commercial entities that are driven by advertisers and by viewers, then you're dealing with a different
I think
animal.
it's important to make that distinction.
Yeah.
I don't, I disagree.
Well, hold on. So let's leave. I think the points have been made. Let's. I don't want this to turn into. We don't need to have a debate here. I think the point is like this. My core point was we have to be very careful about what we're putting in our heads. Because it's not just in a vacuum. It's not innocent. It's not, well, don't worry, I'm just thinking about it. It's not going to do it. It's not going to go anywhere else. What we think about affects how we feel, which affects how we are and how we behave and how we do or don't do in life.
Gossip is the same way. If somebody in the office tells you something about somebody who sits next to you, that's going to generate
Affect the way you feel.
feeling,
Yeah.
even if, and it's not a monetary, but there is an agenda
Yeah.
behind that as well.
You know what they said about what's his name? Everyone's like, what?
I think there's another factor that's involved in this as well, in that people like to have information presented to them in a way that is formatted for their habitual way of thinking already. So it's not only the emotion or the fear that you get addicted to, it's also the ease of the habits of your thoughts. So you're thinking in circles instead of actually laddering up to something higher.
Right.
Those two things together.
The familiar patterns. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So here we have this idea of ila va'ol, its cause and effect, which means that if you want to look at, not if you want to, but there is a process where something is born, but it's born from something else, and you can see where it came from as opposed to being born out of nowhere. It doesn't, it's not coming out of nowhere, it's coming from somewhere. And it's coming from somewhere that leads naturally to this. So don't be surprised that led to this, or that this came from that. We shouldn't be surprised. And again, the example that our text gives, not in a media context, but is the idea of emotions and thinking, or intellectual exercise. What we know and what we think about naturally influences our feelings, and that's not something that comes out of nowhere. Our feelings don't come out of nowhere. They don't pop out of thin air. They're born of what we're thinking about. So change your thoughts, change your feelings, change your mind, change your heart. That's the way it works. If you want to feel differently, there's an app for that. Kidding. If you want, no, really. If you there is, yeah. Or how was it, Headspace or whatever?
Yeah.
So if you want to feel differently, we should launch a Kabbalah version of this, non-monetary, non-monetized, because then we have an agenda. So if we want to feel a certain way, it's not coming out of nowhere. All it takes is to go back and say, okay, so what are the things that I need to think about in order to feel this? That we can hack the system. We're not slaves to emotions. We're not. So in Hebrew, the word for heart is lev. Lev is heart. And there's an animal that sounds like the Hebrew word lev. Do you know what it is? Kelev. What's kelev? A dog. Right? I said before a dog is a fish, but that's dog in Hebrew is fish. But a dog in Hebrew is kelev. Kelev. So the Kabbalists say, you know what kelev is? Kulo lev, or kol lev, all heart. Dogs are very emotional. Right? Dogs are emotional. I don't know what cats are. I'm not wading into that conversation. Cats are
That's
common.
how we Google vacation, pet-friendly vacation.
Ah, exactly. So dogs are man's best friend. They're very emotional. They wear the emotions on their sleeves. I have to, full disclaimer, I've never had a dog. I grew up actually in a home. We had some cats. We had a cat, so I know cats a little bit more. I'm referring to Yanko cats, the neighbor. I'm looking for Ann, and she said right before the Yanko reference. I got so close. Ann, I was looking for you. I made a Yanko reference. So no, it's fine. So cats, yeah. So dogs. So dogs are emotional, from what I hear, from what Kabbalah says at least. So here's the deal: the human is meant to walk the dog. When the dog is walking the human, we got it backwards. Are you with me? Mm-hmm. Right? If the dog is running and the owner is being schlepped afterwards, so the hierarchy, if you will, has been transplanted. So what does it mean in the human experience? So the Adam, the mensch, is the mind. The dog, the kelev, is the lev, is the heart. So here's the question: who's in control? Are our emotions in control? And we're guided by whatever mood we're in. If we're happy, then other people will be okay. And if we're unhappy, oh, watch out. Don't be in my path, I'm unhappy. Is that the way it is? That our lives are controlled by the volatility of our emotions? Or are we in control? Being in control, the first step of being in control is recognizing the power that we have to be in control. If we don't know we have the ability, then we'll never be in control. So one of the basic, the alphabet, the basic like ABCs of Kabbalah is, by nature the human being has the power of moach shalit al halev. Moach is brain. Shalit means controls or rules over, or has the ability to at least. Al halev, on the heart. We have human beings have the ability to mindfully be in control of what we're thinking, which then will dictate how our heart feels. Moach shalit al halev. Our hearts, our emotions, don't have to control us. We can mindfully be in control of the way we feel by recognizing that how we think affects how we feel, so therefore change our thoughts. This answers a question that many commentators ask on the verse in Deuteronomy that becomes the Shema, where it says, well, the first paragraph of the Shema, not the opening line, Hear, O Israel, but the part where it says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And all the commentators ask the same question: how can you command an emotion? How can the Torah say you have to love? You have to love? Tell me what I have to do. You can legislate action, but not emotion. You have to love God. Tell me I have to show up, between the hours of whatever it is, fine. Even if I don't want to, I'll still show up because I have to. But you'll tell me I have to love. You can't force any emotion. You have to love. What if I don't love?
You can cultivate it.
You'll learn.
Comes along Kabbalah and says the commandment is not about the emotion. The commandment is about thinking, because we're in control of our thoughts. We can be. So the mitzvah is, the Torah is telling us, think about the things that will then lead to loving God. So it's not the mitzvah to love. I don't love. So what do you want from me? Love. How are you going to force love? The mitzvah is to think about and meditate on the things that will bring you to love. Yeah. Because what we think about affects how we feel. That's the formula. And the production of emotions from thought is not out of nowhere. The production of emotions is not out of nowhere. It comes from our thoughts. And again, the point is, it's ila va'olol, cause and effect. Input this thought, output that emotion. That's the way it works. So when you look at the emotion, you can see the idea that gave birth to it. When you look at the idea, you can pretty much predict where that's going to go emotionally. You with me so far? All of this is ila va'olol.
So, is the brain, you're saying the brain is creating the emotion, or the brain is selecting the emotion?
That's a great question. Emotions are it's not really created by the brain.
The chakra is always there, right?
Yeah. What the mind is doing is kind of almost like waking up that particular emotion that has its own source. Emotions and ideas are not born of the same stuff, but one triggers the other. So what triggers that particular emotion, it's kind of like playing piano. You hit that key, you're going to have that note. Right? So you think that thought, you meditate, you ponder, you think these ideas, or these combination of ideas, you can hit those notes. Not that the note is my finger. My finger is not making a note.
Note's there.
The note's there, whatever it is. I don't know if this is a good example, but it came to mind. Yeah, it's actually terrible. Whatever, but we get the idea, right? So it's okay, but that's ila va'ol. What's yesh me'ayin? Yesh me'ayin means something from nothing. Yesh me'ayin means something came out of nowhere. There was no predicting that would emerge. And when you have that new thing and you look back, there's a blank slate that precedes it. Not like emotion where you can say, I know why you're feeling that. What were you thinking about? Think about, what were you really thinking about? What have you been thinking about lately? And I'll tell you what you're feeling. No, this is talking about a different type of paradigm altogether where there's something, not an emotion, something that exists out of nowhere. Before it is a blank slate. In other words, nothingness. This is ayin. Ayin is nothing. Nothing existed prior to precipitate this thing. This is so radically new, there was nothing that led to it. We don't have this in the human experience. Everything that exists here, even the new things, are all precipitated by something else.
Even when you get that wisdom?
Pretty much. There's still something. You're still thinking about it on some level. Right? You still had a question. Usually. You're dealing with a No. I was saying, well, maybe that also. Yeah. But no, I'm saying the person usually has a question that's answering, or is struggling with something, or is thinking about something that then comes as a resolution too. It's very rare that something truly comes out of nowhere. Although Chachma is called on some level, yesh me'ayin, it's not, I wouldn't call it pure, true yesh me'ayin. Relative to Bina, which is the process of taking existing information and applying it to other scenarios, which is real ila va'olol. So Chachma is more yesh me'ayin, but it's still not the pure yesh me'ayin of the emergence, the initial emergence of creation from absolute nothingness.
How do you place feelings of awe? It's not yesh me'ayin, but where does it come from?
Yeah, so
like
feelings of
something in wow.
Yeah, that's straight up an ila va'ol. That's, you saw something.
But
so the way it works is the things that we can integrate, we feel a certain way. The things that are beyond our integration makes us feel a certain way, feel odd. There's something when something's bigger than our ability to process it intellectually, it creates a feeling, but it's still being processed intellectually that is too big to be processed intellectually.
No, I understand that it's not yesh me'ayin, but say it's something negative.
Yeah.
But there's no thought there immediately. So how do you hack into that? What was I thinking to make me?
Okay, that's a good question. So then the question is, where do we put ourselves? In which context did that thought come to our minds? And then can I put myself in a different situation where that won't come to mind? Yep. Sometimes it's a literal change of space, literal change of schedule, a literal change of what I'm doing. Sometimes you can hack it by just putting yourself in a different place at a different time, so that subconscious thought doesn't emerge. If we keep the same patterns, we should expect the same stuff. So yeah.
Well, when you're talking about something just doesn't come from nothing. I mean, it's been shown like where people in all different parts of the world who have no connection with each other have developed sort of parallel things, or doing experiments or
Right.
something like that. They have no connection with each other, but there's got to be something.
Some sort of consciousness that connects. Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
something there that spurs these people and who have no connection with each other to come up with something.
Right. So even the innovation, there's some sort of precipitating thing that's at least making it conducive for people to think of these from out of nowhere things at the same time.
I think it's because the platform of education is supporting that type of development of that structure. Right. Once everybody learns a certain level of mathematics, a certain possibility of certain thoughts of what you can do with that mathematics becomes possible.
Right. Which means that it's not purely from nothing.
No.
Right. Which that's exactly right. That's exactly the point. Which means that it's on a foundation that now you have this innovation, but it's still not purely from
nothing.
From nowhere. There's still something there that was precipitated.
For sure.
How would you explain people who have profound spiritual experiences where they perceive the universe completely differently, whether facilitated through drugs or through something else, where suddenly everything is completely different? How would that be done?
Reminds me of what was it in the 60s? Who was that guy that was promoting LSD as Timothy Leary. Yeah.
But there have been profound spiritual experiences for way longer
yes.
than that.
No, for
Not
sure.
always through drugs,
right.
Somebody sees the universe completely differently from one moment to the
It
next.
is possible to have moments of this. It's possible. But again, the normative experience, we're usually building off of something else that's previously there. Because we're created in the divine image, and because the divine force, God's force, is everywhere, at any point there is that possibility. But more than not, God runs the world in a more natural progression method, and not in this supernatural. I would say a miracle is really the definition of a miracle versus nature is that which comes out of nowhere. And so, for example, what makes the sea splitting, let's say, in the Exodus from Egypt, right? What makes the sea splitting a miracle versus the sea doing what it usually does? Why is one miraculous and one not? Why is the nature of water to rest in a sea or an ocean and just stay there? Why is that not the miracle? Maybe that's the miracle. Maybe water usually stands up and that's the miracle. Because that's what we're used to. Right? So God usually runs the world, and however things usually run, that's what we call nature. What's a miracle? When something goes out of the ordinary. So what I would say is like this, that nature is akin to ila va'al. Things progress in a normative fashion. When something comes out of nowhere, it's unusual, we call that either yesh me'ayin or a miracle or both, right? I mean, it's really it's kind of synonymous in that we didn't see it coming. It's not normal, it's not natural for that to happen. That suddenly happened out of nowhere. The sea split. There's nothing about the nature of water that would cause it to stand upright like a wall and create a path in the middle. That was not precipitated by any natural force. That's not ilaval. It's not like, well, the water, it was kind of doing its thing, and then suddenly the next step is for it to split. It's not normal, right? So that's a miracle that's coming from nowhere. Hold the thought for a second, because here's where I want to bring kind of things together. So the idea of yesh me'ayin, and this is what I want to focus on, is something that's coming from nothing. And what is nothing? Nothing doesn't mean that there was literally nothing there before. What it means is that there was nothing like this thing that now is. So when we say that creation happens, the first moment of creating the universe happens yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, it doesn't mean that there's literally nothing else before the world, because of course there's God. And who are we to call God nothing? That's kind of rude. We come from nothing. God's like, thank you.
Maybe not a thing.
That's what it is. Right. So what is nothing?
Yeah.
Nothing is nothing like our creator reality, or no thing, nothing tangible like we are tangible. So when we talk about yesh me'ayin, what we mean is, as opposed to ila va'olol means, cause and effect means that this new thing is very similar to what came before it. Yesh me'ayin means the new thing is very not similar to what came before it, to the point that it looks like it's coming from nowhere. Of course, it's not from nowhere, but it's from nothing that looks like this, or nothing like this, nothing that shares the same properties as this.
Yeah.
In other words, is God bound by time and space? No. The definition of the universe, even the highest spiritual rungs of the universe, i.e. the world of Atzilut, the highest worlds, those worlds and dimensions are still marked by the dimensions of time and space. Even spiritual time and space, whatever, it's still time and space. God is not bound by time and space, therefore the emergence of something called time and space, and any sort of definition, even a spiritual definition, any definition is radically different than non-definition. The greatest jump is between non-definition and definition. Once you're in the world of definitions and limitations, to move from one to another is ila va'ol. Are you with me on this? Once you have now limitations and parameters, to move from this parameter to that parameter to that parameter to that parameter, becoming more and more concretized, all of that is progression. But the first movement from no definition to definition, that's radical. That's what we call yesh me'ayin. So this is what we said last week. All of this was to explain last week. How we said that ila va'ol, in the process of something from something else, there is a closeness between the two parties. The effect is close in proximity or conceptual proximity to the cause. This new thing is similar and close to what came before it. Even in case of intellect and emotions, emotions are not ideas, and ideas are not emotions. Nonetheless, it's easy to say, look, I'm feeling this. I know where it came from. I was thinking this. It triggered that emotion. I get it. So it's not like super distant from each other. They're close to each other. Maybe they're not the same thing, right? They're not the same exact thing, but they're close to each other. There's a proximity. And you can see in a reasonable fashion how one led to the other and how one was produced by the other. When it comes to yesh me'ayin, when it comes to creating something from nothing, and really the only experience that is like this is creating the world, a world of definition from no definition, creating a world of parameters, time and space, from no time and space prior, right? So that creation of this new thing called universe, or yesh, or existence, that's brand new. That didn't exist prior. What, nothing exists prior? God existed prior, but God's not at all like this. God doesn't have these limitations or definitions. God doesn't exist in a box or whatever you want to call it, in some sort of constraint. So this is not coming from nowhere. Nothing like that, or we can't fathom what the source looks like because we are radically different than source. In this modality, in this construct of creation, we call it distant. There's a distance, a gap between the new thing and that which was. It's not close. Close means you can see how one led to the other. This is not close. This is the fact that God can do anything, even can create something as ridiculous as this. When I say ridiculous, I don't mean to denigrate this world, but I mean as radical is a better word, as radically different as this. Let me start that sentence again. God can do anything, including creating a reality so radically different that it looks like it's coming out of nowhere. Correct? But that means the creation happens in a way of a gap, in a way of a lot of space, and not a closeness. There's a big gap between created, and creator. Between isness and...
Well, perspective. Our perspective doesn't
Right.
go as far as wherever that.
There's an unbridgeable gap. There's a blank slate after which we can't fathom. We can imagine that we can't fathom it, but we can't actually fathom it. There's the way of knowing something b'derech shlili. I know what I don't know. But then there's the way of chiyuvi, of understanding what it actually is. In philosophy, right? You can know what something is not, or you can know what something is. We don't know what God is. We know what God is not. God is not anything that we know, right? But what is God?
Undefined.
Once we get into that, then it's certainly not a Jewish God. Once we're defining God, yeah.
I used to annoy Rebecca and Nina by describing like what things are not. What things are.
Yeah. Dad, not that again. You know the story about the little girl who's drawing a picture, and the mother comes into the kitchen and says, "What are you drawing? A picture of God?" And the mother says, "No one knows what God looks like." And the child says, "Well, they will know soon once I'm done." Such a cute story. Yeah. So there's a gap. There's an unbridgeable gap. We will never know. We can't know God. God is too distant. It's too unlike us. We're stuck in a way of thinking.
But isn't it possible to know God like through his manifestations, at least at that point?
But we can know the manifestation through the manifestations.
Right.
We can know, right, so like let's say through Torah. So we can know what God wants us to do in this world. That we know. But beyond that, what do we really know?
Yeah.
We basically know that we don't really know. That's the truest thing that we can say. The truest thing that we can say is that God is way beyond what we can know. That's the truest thing. Once we start saying, well, God is this and is that, then we're starting to put an image around God.
Put conditions around
Yeah, it's a
something.
definition. We're starting to put a definition around God, and that becomes very dangerous. Because who's defining God? And are we defining God in his image or in our image? And why is God his anyway? Why is God, right? That's another question.
The intelligence community talks about need to know,
Yeah,
and we know what we need to know.
Right.
God is.
right. Oh,
Right.
right. Yeah. Or maybe God isn't.
No, God is.
Okay. Even I would say I agree with you, but just because I want to start some trouble, even is somewhat of a definition already. So, but it's the best. It's the best that we can do, but it's still a soft definition. Whatever. Listen. The difference is stark between Ila V'al and Yesh Mi'ayin. Ila V'al means that you have something now, and you see where it came from, and it's logical. Yeah, that led to this. This comes from that. I see the relationship between the two, and I get it. Even though I'm standing at, let's say, the lower rung, I can understand the rung that preceded it. I understand it. Might be higher, but I get it, and it gets me. We get each other. Makes sense. There's a relationship there, right? We're all connected. But when it comes to yesh mi'ayin, this new thing, can it all relate to that? I can't say that the beyond can't relate to insight, because if we're talking about God and us, I'm sure God can figure out how to break that unbridgeable gap, because God can do anything. But at least us, we can't. So that's why in Kabbalah, Ila Va'ol is called creation. Creation, it's not really creation, it's more modification, but creation in a way of closeness. Cause and effect is close, whereas Yesh Mi'ayin is creation in a way of distance. There's a gap between the two that we'll never be able to truly bridge. It's really an unbridgeable gap. Does this make sense? Hopefully this answered your question at the end of class last week. All of this was to answer your question.
I know. That's a lot of work.
Okay. No, but really it's
But
it's really to set up today's discussion. Today So we're deep in today's discussion. Here's the big idea. There's notwithstanding everything we said, there's still the baseball idea. And the baseball idea is the exact opposite of everything I just said. Because when it comes to Ila va'olol, when it comes to cause and effect, the cause can step away and the effect still exists. It's close, but it doesn't need it. Because it's close, it doesn't need it. Whereas when we're talking about yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, in order to produce that something from that nothingness and it not revert back to that nothingness state, that process of creating something from nothing has to constantly be happening. I'm introducing a new idea now. That's not a new idea. It's my baseball idea. In order to force something into a radically new state of being, not a modified state of being, to take a cup and to bend it a certain way, or to rip it open and make it into a boat. I don't know if that's possible. Right? That I can do. And I don't need the original shape of the cup. I don't need the tools once I'm done. I can change it, modify it, and we're good to go. It's close, but because it's close, I don't need the thing before it. When it comes to yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, because it's so impossible, because it defies logic, how do you go from non-definition to definition? It's an unbridgeable gap. How do you go there? Because it's so radical. Because it's so distant and so radical, you constantly need that creative force to make it be something, as opposed to reverting to nothing. Like the baseball, that you need constantly the force in order for it to soar in the sky. And the moment you pull the force, it goes back to its original nature. The Kabbalists explain that if God were to pull the creative yesh me'ayin force from existence, this whole reality would revert back to nothingness, non-definition. In order for definition to be, the very basic definition of this universe and of all the worlds, in order for the created definition to be, it has to constantly be imposed upon it and constantly be created. So creation doesn't happen once upon a time. Creation, in its original sense, is an ongoing process. Every moment, the world, the universe, all of the worlds of existence, everything is being powered into existence, something from nothing, constantly. And this represents the ultimate paradox, because this is a creation that's born of distance. And yet, this distance creation needs the ultimate closeness of source infusing the new created thing constantly. Are you with me on the paradox? Mm-hmm. It's distant but close. Whereas Ila va'olol is close, but then you don't need the thing anymore. The simple example is, I can take paint in one form on a palette, and I can Bob Ross it on a canvas, and I can walk away, and the paint can walk away. Well, not the paint on the canvas, but I can walk away, and it remains. I can take metal or clay and sculpt it into something, or do you sculpt clay? That's the right term? Sculpt, yeah. There we go. And I can walk away, and it'll still be a misshapen bowl. It's still going to remain the way I left it. It doesn't need me to be, it still exists. Because it's close, because it's not radical, it actually doesn't need the cause anymore once it's been affected. Whereas when it comes to something radical, something from nothing, because it's so radical, it doesn't make sense that it is. And in order for it to be, it always needs that creative force constantly vivifying and making it be. And so, before we conclude, we need to read this. Just a few paragraphs.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
I think that the closest thing, well, to me, that we can have in envisioning this is the birth of a child.
To the parent or the grandparent?
To which one? Ila va'al or yesh me'ayin? Cause and effect, or?
Both of them.
But the child doesn't need the parent to continue to exist.
They need the creation, they need the force, they need nurturing.
They need nurturing. They definitely need something, but they don't need, the parent doesn't have to constantly rebirth them into that essential being. The universe is different. If not, it's just one page. If not for that power, that force of God to make it something, it would be nothing at any moment. I'm going to read this very quickly. This is coming from chapter 2 of Sha'ar Yichud Ve'emunah. From the foregoing exposition, the answer to the heretics is deduced, and the root of the error of those who deny individual divine providence and the signs and miracles recorded in the Torah is revealed. Let's just continue going. They err, making a false analogy in comparing the work of God, the creator of heaven and earth, to the work of man and his schemes. For when a goldsmith has made a vessel, that vessel is no longer dependent upon the smith. And even when his hands are removed from it and he goes away, the vessel remains in exactly the same image and form as when it left the hands of the smith. In the same way, these fools conceive the creation of heaven and earth, i.e. that God created it once upon a time, walked away, is now playing golf, and the universe doesn't need a creator anymore. But some of the great philosophers believed in an original, first cause, but not in a God that's constantly invested in creation.
That was the difference between like creating the universe versus like evolution. You know, within evolution, things are continuously, the creation keeps going.
Right.
I think that was, a lot of people have those arguments between, evolution and creation. They don't realize that evolution is creation, it's just continuous.
Correct, correct, exactly. No. But their eyes are covered and they fail to see the great difference between the work of man and his schemes, which consists of making one thing out of another which already exists, merely changing the form and appearance from an ingot of silver to a vessel, and making of heaven and earth, which is creatio ex nihilo, i.e. creating something from nothing. Indeed, so his point is like this. When you're taking silver and making it into a thing, whatever that is, a vessel, right? So then you took something, you made it to something else. You're not needed anymore. It existed before you, it exists after you. You're just manipulating something. So it's ila va'al, it's cause and effect, but you're not needed. But when we talk about yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, you're not taking something that existed and repackaging it. This is brand new. This doesn't make sense. And it continues to not make sense. Therefore, you continuously need a force to make it be against all logic. Indeed, this is an even greater miracle than, for example, the splitting of the Red Sea, which I mentioned before. For then God drove back the sea by a strong east wind all the night, and the waters were divided and stood upright as a wall. If God had stopped the wind, the waters would have instantly flowed downward, as is their way and nature. And undoubtedly they would not have stood upright as a wall, even though the nature of water to flow downward is also created ex nihilo. For a stone wall stands erect by itself without the assistance of the wind. But the nature of water is not so. What he's saying is, look, when it came to the miracle of the splitting of the Red Sea, which I alluded to before, so it says that God drove a wind all night to keep the water standing up. Why? Because without the wind, what would have happened? The waters would have collapsed. How come the waters didn't transform? Because it would be against their nature. So if you want to force something against its nature, then you need that force constantly imposing upon it. If you want to make a baseball fly, you have to impose a force. The moment that force, that wind for the Red Sea, or the force with the baseball is removed, it reverts back to its status quo. Which means that the universe has a status quo. Non-existence. Everything has a status quo. No definition, no existence, just God. That's the status quo of all. For any of this to be, requires a constant force of God to make it be. Thus, if for the miracle of the splitting of the Red Sea, the continuous action of God was necessary, how much more so is it in the creation of being out of nothing, which transcends nature and is far more miraculous than the splitting of the Red Sea, that with the withdrawal of the power of the Creator from the thing created, God forbid, it would revert to naught and complete non-existence. What he's saying here is, if God were to pull the plug, it's not like things would stop moving.
There would be no things.
There's no thing.
Yeah.
It's not like things would go dark, or things would freeze, or there's nothing. There's nothing. Not nothing that we can imagine, real nothing. Rather, the activating force of the Creator must continuously be in the thing created to give it life and existence. These forces are the letters of speech of the 10 utterances by which beings were created. You might recognize this. This is a text that we learned prior to this text about the secrets of creation, the mysteries of the universe. The point that we're bringing it here is to illustrate this simple notion that how does creation happen? Not evolution, not the Ila Va'ala part of it, but how does creation happen? It happens through distance and closeness. Distance because something and nothing are not similar. A universe of definition, time and space, another definition, is not at all like the Creator. Creator is also a limiting term. It's defining God as a creator. It's not at all like God, which is also a limitation, right? But this is not at all like God. So there's a distance on the one hand. On the other hand, there's the greatest closeness, the most intimate closeness of God's force needing to continuously make this be out of nowhere. Are you with me on this? So what is all this saying? We're not going to go back to our text this week. We're going to pick it up next week. But you should know this is the essence of chapter 12 of our text. And what's the point of it all? If a person thinks about this and meditates on this idea, how the world emerges from nothing like this world, how God is far removed from created reality, limited reality, defined reality, with limitations of time and space. God is not at all like this. We have emerged out of nowhere in the most miraculous sense. And there's an unbridgeable gulf between us and God. We can't even fathom who and what God is. It's the greatest gap possible. And yet, notwithstanding the gap, God bridges the gap at every single moment by recreating all of this, by reinvesting in all of this, by giving this impossibility possibility. When we meditate on this, we're struck with two feelings. One of the awe and the grandeur of God, and number two, the love and closeness of this grand God. How magnificently grand and great and transcendent and beyond God is. Not even relative in any way. God is completely beyond. And at the same time chooses at every moment to reinvest and to inform and to suffuse this with life at every moment. That can make a person excited about God and excited about existence. Here is God who's way beyond and yet choosing to be inside of me at this moment. Because if not, nothingness.
But
that's an incredible meditation.
Couldn't we get to know like God though through these different manifestations that He has, like like the concept of like a kalim or different vessels or modalities?
You can, but what you're getting to know, for example, when you learn about an artist through their art, you're learning about the artist vis-a-vis the art that they've created. So I only know Picasso as a creator of art.
Right.
But who was Picasso had he never done art? Or who was Picasso when he finished doing it?
You only know Picasso when he did that piece of art.
That piece of
He
art.
might have changed a little bit
You know
from the
the
next piece of
derivative.
art.
Correct. So what you do know, you definitely do know, but what you do know is only what was invested in this process, but you don't know what's beyond that. Like children, for example, children and parents. Children know their parents as parents. They know them as their parents, but they don't know who they really are.
Right.
I mean, at some point, hopefully, like those conversations happen on that higher level. But definitely for a certain number of years, the child only knows the parent vis-a-vis the child, really, and that parenting relationship.
What is this idea? How do we begin to think about the past? Because if every moment is
Yeah.
being created, then can we really envision a past that exists?
Yeah. Yes,
And
we
Can
can.
we then envision a future? We can't really envision a future. It's just really putting us within that moment.
Well, or you could say that since God is beyond time, every moment that will ever be has already been created.
Has been created. So what is the
One example we once gave, and this is the what is course. Remember the what is?
Well, that's what I'm thinking about, is that how can we imagine, I think as we talked about there, that the past really, I don't want to say doesn't exist, but I don't have the words to.
It doesn't exist and it exists.
And it exists, yeah.
Mazel tov.
Because it's now in within us, but it's our own reality.
We go
But
through
from
it.
this,
We go
doesn't
through it in a
exist.
linear fashion, in a chronological fashion. But God is not subject to the same limitations. Right? We're like if we would draw on look, flip books. Remember those flip books where like the stick figure goes?
Yeah.
That's my robot dance also. Right? Where whatever. So, right? So that whole thing you flip through. It does. So for the character, as you're flipping, so that's happening in the present. But the book existed before and after.
But I'm thinking that the past then is then our creation. It's our memory. But based on this,
It could be objective also.
If existence is within this creation and distance constantly, then it's within the moment, and then the past is simply our own recording of it, but it doesn't actually make it existing.
Yeah, right. Or you could say that in this moment, all the past and all the future are also created in this one moment, being recreated. The entire spectrum is being created in this moment, which means that what I do now can impact the past, which is the power of teshuvah, to redefine the past, and can imprint on the future as well. These are heavy things. I mean, this is time, and I mean that's what we're doing. But here's, if I were to summarize today, this is the main point. If we miss this point, then I haven't done a good job. Then it was like the lights, and the lights went out and done. Nothing remained. I'm kidding. So the main point is the paradox. The last point is really the main point, is the paradox. How creation is vastly distant, or is a product of, or creation, something from nothing, represents incredibly vast distance, like incomparable distance. You can't compare this something to the nothing, and nothing is not really nothing, it's God. But you can totally incomparable on the one hand. On the other hand, it's unfathomably close and intimate, because that creative force is constantly infusing the isness with its business. I don't know if that makes sense. With its isness. It's constantly making it is. Because if not, it would be isn't. It would not be. So the paradox is the distance and the closeness. And all of this in chapter 12 of our text is being used, which we'll see next week, as a meditation to start feeling an excitement about God. How God is so big and yet so close. That's an amazing thing if we really think about it. Because otherwise we're just thinking about stock market and other things, and then we get worried. But if we're thinking about God, we have a shot at feeling something toward God. And what is the feeling that we're going to try to get to? A feeling of excitement, and a feeling of yearning, a feeling of love, a feeling of joy. It's an energy toward God. And again, the meditation here is how vastly distant God is, the source is, at the same time how close God is to make all of this be. This is the paradox of creation yesh me'ayin, the paradox of something from nothing. It's distant, but it's close. How's that possible? God pulls it off.
It's kind of like how something is solid, but then if you really look at it, it's like 99% empty space. It's
The
like
whole
a paradox.
universe could fit what into like a small little.
It's something, it's solid, but it's not really solid.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's distant, but it's not distant. It's
Yeah.
close, but it's not really close. And again, the point is not just an intellectual exercise. The point here is to then inform how we feel. That we have access inside of us and inside everything around us to the greatest source. to the unfathomable source. It's inside of us at every moment, making us be. That's kind of incredible. All right, thank you for joining me today for Kabbalah and Conundrums. Okay, so next week we get back into our text. We finish off the love meditation and we get into the brokenness meditation, which is completely different. Okay, and all of this is to get back. Trust me, we're gonna get back to this. We're gonna get back to the notion of ego and how ego, even in this meditation, can mess us up. The dangers of ego. But first, we need to present the meditation and then talk about the dangers of ego. Good. What's upcoming? Anybody know? Help me out. Purim is coming up next week. What else? Men, Women, and Judaism. Oh, that's a good course. Folks, you want to come to this. So a few things. This week we have, tomorrow night is, Rosh Chodesh Society is tomorrow night. We also have tomorrow night is the last session of our Spiritual Development Masterclass. So both are happening at the same time, 7:30. One upstairs, Masterclass. Rosh Chodesh Society, my wife is teaching, Leah is teaching downstairs in Jeff's place. So that's tomorrow night at 7:30. Everyone's invited. Women are invited to the Rosh Chodesh, but men and women are invited upstairs. That's one thing. Tuesday night and Thursday are the JLI class. Lesson number 6, also the last lesson of Judaism's Gifts to the World. Wednesday is Torah study. And then Thursday night is Lodestone. Next week on Monday night is Purim. Monday night is Purim.
Yes.
So yeah, Monday night we're having a sober Purim celebration downstairs, and then the next day we're having a Roaring 20s theme Purim celebration.
That's so cool.
Right?
Yeah.
Flappers and gangsters. So join us for that.
Yes.
Join us for that on Tuesday. More information on the website, Intown.org. That's that. And then in a few weeks' time, we're starting a brand new course called Men, Women, and Judaism. Understanding Gender in Jewish Spirituality and Ritual. It's a really great course. It talks about a lot of important issues that we think about today. So join me for that starting in 2 weeks.
I didn't understand the cost for that. $18
Yeah,
a
no,
session?
it's messed up on the thing. It's $50. The flyer's wrong, and I meant to change it, and I didn't change it yet. I think our designer worked off of a different flyer that had different price.
Oh, is that in English too?
This?
Yeah.
Only it's out of print. I actually
Yeah,
contacted.
'cause I never get it.
So listen,
I look like I thought it
you
was
can get
bad.
on
I said the English
Kabbalah.org.
was
You can get. Oh, sorry, you can get on Sichos in English. You can get the text on the publisher's website. They make everything available. The problem is that it's out of print. I contacted my guys at Kahas, and I said, "Do you want to do it heritage style, like with the Hebrew English with the annotation? I'm ready to do it. I'm doing it anyway." So they said you got to speak to Sichos in English. So I may be involved in getting this back out. We'll see.
When I saw it on the website, I saw just that cover. So I said, "Is it in English too?" No.
Not available. It's been out of print for a few years. It's such an important text, though.
Yeah.
It really needs to be in print. All right, thank you all for joining me today. I know it wasn't easy for everyone to get in. If you were outside the marathon circumference, it was not easy. So I appreciate everyone being here. In fact, in my I have to admit that in my